Hey everybody, I'm Mike Thompson. I'm the senator from the 10th District in the state of Kansas. I'm also the chairman of the Utilities Committee for the Senate on the Kansas side. And I've been a meteorologist also for about 45 years. I was on television, some of you may know, for a number of years, but I actually started off in meteorology, got into television by accident, so meteorology really was my career for many, many years, so I understand the climate and everything else. One thing I've also done is studied the energy issues for many, many years, particularly as some of these renewables started coming onto the scene, because it was clear that what was happening in Europe was eventually going to come here. And if you look to what's happened in places like Germany and the UK, where they're having all sorts of blackouts, energy poverty, and things of that nature, if we don't pay attention to the lessons they're already learning, we're going to experience that here. And we're at a tipping point right now in the state of Kansas where if we don't make some smart decisions, we're going to be paying for it very, very soon. Let me start off by explaining the two sources of energy and why it's very, very important. We rely on what we call base load. These are dispatchable sources of energy. That's your coal, your nuclear, and your gas. Those are what provide most of the energy that you use 24/7 to keep your lights on. They call it dispatchable because it's easily dispatched at a moment's notice. If you need the lights, you flip it on, that's where the energy's coming from. Then there's the non-reliable or non-dispatchable sources, and that's primarily your renewables, the solar and the wind. And we call them non-reliable or non-dispatchable because you can't control when the wind blows. We do know the sun comes up once every day and sets. However, the sun angle changes. There are days where there are a lot of clouds, so the sun is not that efficient either, only about 20% as a matter of fact. So the question is, why are we investing in all of these renewable sources of energy? And a lot of people will say, well, it's because we've got to combat climate change. And that is one of the biggest scams out there. Unfortunately, there have been decades of misinformation fed to the general public that we've got to reduce our carbon dioxide, we've got to reduce the carbon footprint. Nothing could be farther from the truth. In fact, carbon dioxide has no correlation with temperature on this planet whatsoever. It's a very, very minor player. The sun is the only thing that drives the climate on this planet. So unless we can change the trajectory of this planet around the sun, we cannot change the climate of the planet. And I think people get confused by that because saying, well, but wait a minute, we've got all these cars, we put stuff into the air. You're confusing environment with climate. You can put stuff into the environment that has no impact on the climate whatsoever. And I'm not saying that we pollute. In fact, I'm saying just the opposite. We do need to clean our air and keep it clean. We do need to keep the water clean. We do need to do things to maintain our environment so that we have healthy living. But we can do all these things or not do all those things, and it still gets cold in the winter and it still gets hot in the summer because how we have a relationship with the sun. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the sun angle changes constantly over the course of thousands of years, and that changes our climate. So do we need to spend trillions and trillions of dollars on renewable energy to save the climate? The answer to that is no. So then the question becomes, why are we doing it? Well, with regard to energy sources, we have to ask this. Is this an energy source that's going to keep electricity costs down for us? Is it going to be viable long term? Is it going to be available? Is it going to become obsolete over the course of a period of time that we use it? And the answer for most of those questions when it comes to solar and wind is no. Those are sources we're pouring tons and tons of money into, and the only reason to pour that money in is so some investor in those renewables can have access to production tax credits. They get a break on property tax. You're paying for all this, by the way, through your federal taxes. The production tax credit goes back to these wind and solar companies through the fact that these get pilot or payment in lieu of taxes on their property tax. These solar and wind facilities do not pay property tax for 10 years in the state of Kansas, so they get to depreciate and they'll pay far less than you will ever pay on your property tax. Why should they get a break for something that's unreliable, that we can't count on 24/7? And then there's something called virtual power purchase agreements, and they have access to backdoor funding through that. Let me explain that very quickly. They get tax credits for investing in renewables, so they can increase their E.S.G score, their environmental, social, and governance score. If you don't know anything about this, you better look it up, because it is impacting you right now. In fact, your 401k is probably being affected by your E.S.G score, and that's going to be a bigger and bigger problem going forward. So how do these companies get their E.S.G score up? They invest in renewables. So say Facebook, somewhere elsewhere in the country, wants to invest in a wind farm somewhere in Kansas, or a solar farm here in Kansas to get their E.S.G score up. They will send the money to that installation. That installation will give them the tax credits. Might not be 1 kilowatt of electricity ever go to this company in a distant location, but they get the tax credit. So it's a backdoor subsidy. You're paying for that too, believe it or not, in your electrical bill. In Kansas, we're paying huge amounts of money for transmission lines, for the adjustment of energy costs, and you're paying for all of that. And our electrical costs in the state of Kansas are higher now than they were back in 2007, before we started seeing all these renewables coming online. We've had to pay for all the transmission lines. We've had to pay for the additional peaking generating power, which is now natural gas pretty much. And all of this cost comes to Kansans, but that electricity goes out of state. So we pay the highest average retail electrical costs of all the surrounding states, and it's making us non-competitive. So companies here in Kansas could move to Missouri or Oklahoma and pay, in some cases, half the electrical costs that we pay in Kansas. What's that going to do to businesses here in Kansas? Some of them are going to get smart and say, why are we doing this? And that's all because we're adding all these renewables just so companies can take advantage of all these tax credits, backdoor subsidies, not have to pay property tax, and in most cases, these wind and solar installations don't have to produce a kilowatt of electricity and make enough of a profit that they are undermining our baseload plants. Believe it or not, that's the simple explanation about what's happening economically. So the question to you is, why make this decision? Why support a continuation of the degradation of our economics here in Kansas? Why contribute to the destabilization of the electrical grid in this state when we've got some serious problems? We have more electrical capacity for generation in Kansas than we need. That's before we add the renewables. We're 56% more generation capacity with just your nuclear, coal, and gas. So why do we add all these? Good question. I hope that you consider that when you make those decisions, either to go down the renewable path or not.